Stop scrolling for a moment. Yes, you. You didn't find this by accident, and I know that's easy to dismiss. But something in you hesitated before leaving. That quiet pause. That's where this begins. Because you've been moving through your days normally. Talking, working, smiling, keeping everything together on the outside. Yet underneath it, there's been a question you haven't said out loud. A sense that something isn't fully settled between you and God. Not broken, just unfinished. And you've tried to ignore it. You've distracted yourself, stayed busy, told yourself you'd think about it later when life slowed down. But later hasn't really come. So before you scroll again, just notice this. Out of everything you could be watching right now, you're here. Still listening. And maybe part of you is wondering why this feels a little more personal than it should. I won't ask you to believe anything yet. Just stay with me for a moment. Because if God really did bring you here today, what would he be trying to get your attention about? You didn't click this by accident. Before anything else, understand this. What you're feeling right now is not random. It's not just curiosity. And it isn't just another video playing in the background while you do something else. Something in you slowed down enough to notice, and that matters more than you think. I am speaking to you, not the version of you that everyone else sees, not the one that knows the right words to say or the right responses to give. I am speaking to the you that becomes quiet when the day ends and the noise finally fades. You felt it lately, a tension you couldn't explain, moments that should have felt peaceful but didn't. Prayers that started sincere and slowly turned into silence. Not because you stopped believing, but because you stopped expecting to hear anything back. You didn't walk away from me in one decision. You drifted. A small delay here. A quiet later there. A habit of postponing what once felt important. And drifting feels harmless while it's happening. You told yourself you were just busy, just tired, just in a different season. You planned to come back when life felt more stable, when you felt more ready, when you felt worthy again. But later became distance, and distance has weight. You feel it even now, though you rarely name it. You fill the silence with distraction so you don't have to sit inside that awareness for too long. Yet every now and then, it surfaces without warning. Like tonight. You still believe in me, but you haven't been listening. You've asked me for peace while holding on to what unsettles you. You've asked me for clarity while avoiding what would make it clear. That restlessness you keep trying to outrun, it isn't anxiety. It's conviction, not to shame you, but to wake you before you grow comfortable staying where you are. Because ignoring my voice doesn't make the calling disappear. It only makes the distance feel normal. And right now, you're closer to a decision than you realize. So pause here for a moment and be honest. What have you been quietly hoping I wouldn't ask you to change? You're still here. That alone says something, because most people leave the moment a message begins to touch what they've been avoiding. You didn't. And the reasons isn't pressure. It's recognition. I am not distant from you right now. You've wondered why certain thoughts keep returning when everything is quiet. Why distractions work for a while but never completely. Why some prayers felt easier to stop than to continue. You told yourself it was just fatigue, just a phase, just life being full. But I was waiting in that silence, not because I left you, but because you were learning how much noise you used to keep from hearing me. And once the noise fades, what remains becomes harder to ignore. You've noticed things don't satisfy you the same way anymore. What once filled your attention now feels thin. Not wrong, just empty. You've tried to recreate the feeling you used to have, but it doesn't stay. That isn't punishment. It's mercy. If everything still worked, you wouldn't have stopped to look deeper. If comfort stayed complete, you wouldn't have noticed what was missing. I allowed the unease so you would recognize your dependence again, not as weakness, but as connection. You're afraid that coming closer means losing control, that obedience will rearrange plans you carefully built, conversations you've delayed, habits you've justified because they felt manageable. You're right about one thing. It will cost you something. But staying where you are is already costing you more than you admit. Your clarity, your attentiveness, your peace. You've felt that dullness, that hesitation, where confidence once lived. A quiet awareness that time keeps moving while you stand still inside yourself. That fear didn't come from me, but I am using it to call you back. Return doesn't begin with doing more. It begins with stopping the resistance you've learned to explain. You don't need perfect words. You don't need a long promise. You don't need to understand every step ahead. You only need honesty, the kind you avoid because it changes what comes next. So answer this quietly, without trying to soften it. Will you keep managing the distance, or will you let me close it? You're closer than you think. Not because you've done everything right, but because you're still listening instead of turning away. That matters more than you realize. There was a time when you believed closeness meant certainty, that walking with me meant never doubting, never hesitating, never struggling the way you do now. And when that illusion faded, you assumed distance had begun. But distance didn't start when you struggled. It started when you stopped being honest. You learned how to pray without saying what you actually felt. You learned how to worship while guarding parts of your heart. You learned how to say you trusted me while quietly holding control. And I let you, not because I wanted the distance, but because love does not force surrender. I will not take what you refuse to give. You've wondered why my voice feels quiet or late, why direction doesn't come as clearly as before, why discernment feels slow, uncertain, harder to recognize. It's not because I stopped speaking, it's because you stopped responding to the last thing I asked. I do not give new direction when the previous step is still waiting. There is something specific you keep circling, a conversation you avoid, a habit you excuse, a step you postpone because you know it will change more than you planned. You keep asking me to show the outcome first. But faith has never worked that way. Trust comes before clarity, movement before confirmation, surrender before relief. You've been trying to understand instead of follow, trying to feel ready instead of willing. And the tension you carry, the one that won't fade, is not condemnation. It is alignment trying to happen. I am not disappointed in you, but I am serious with you, because what lies ahead requires a sensitivity you are losing by staying comfortable. What I'm preparing you for cannot be carried while your attention is divided. You don't need to fix everything today, but you cannot keep doing nothing. So don't rush past this awareness. Don't silence it with distraction, because what you do with what you already know will shape what you hear from me next. This is where it becomes real, not loud, not public, just you and me, and the decision you keep delaying. You've noticed how easy it is to promise yourself more time. You tell yourself you'll think about it tomorrow, pray about it later, deal with it when life feels calmer. But deep down you know it isn't about needing more time. It's about needing courage. Because obedience always asks you to release something familiar, and familiarity feels safer than freedom, even when it quietly keeps you stuck. You've been holding on to patterns that once protected you, ways of coping that made sense when you were tired, hurt, or unsure. They helped you survive a season, but they were never meant to define you. I know why you hesitate. You're afraid that if you let go, you won't recognize who you become. You're afraid surrender will expose parts of you you've worked hard to hide. You're afraid obedience will cost more than you can carry. But listen carefully. I never ask you to release something without intending to replace it with something truer. What you call control, I see as weight. What you call protection, I see as distance. What you call caution, I see as fear making decisions quietly. And fear rarely shouts. It persuades you to stay still. That's why this moment feels heavy. You sense the difference between remaining where you are and stepping into what requires trust. You've prayed for change, you've asked for direction, you've wanted growth. But growth always arrives with responsibility, not to perform, but to respond. You don't need every answer before you move. You don't need confidence before you say yes. You only need to stop resisting what you already recognize. I am not waiting for you to feel fearless. I am waiting for you to stop letting fear decide. So be honest with yourself for a moment. Will you hold on to what feels safe, or trust me with what comes next? Now listen carefully. This is where many turn back. Not because they don't believe, but because belief is easier than surrender. You've been telling yourself that staying where you are is neutral, that waiting is wise, that doing nothing protects you from choosing wrong. But there is no neutral ground here. Every day you delay, something in you is being shaped, either by trust or by fear. And fear is subtle. It doesn't tell you to leave me. It just tells you there's always a better time to respond. Later when you feel stronger. Later when life is clearer. Later when you're certain. But certainty was never the requirement. Trust was. You've expected obedience to feel peaceful before taking the step. Yet peace follows obedience, not the other way around. That tension inside you comes from knowing what matters while still negotiating with it. You want assurance without risk, direction without surrender. My presence, but on your terms. And I care for you too deeply to agree to that. Because what I am drawing you toward cannot be entered while you cling to what you fear losing. You've asked me to lead, yet you keep holding the controls. You've asked me to change things, yet resist the change beginning within you. This moment isn't about promises or big declarations. It's about honesty. So answer quietly, without excuses. Are you willing to trust me, even if the next step feels uncomfortable? Because whatever you choose now won't only shape what happens next. It will shape who you become as you move forward. This is the moment after the question. Nothing around you has changed yet, but something inside you is beginning to move. You can feel the stillness. Not peaceful, not chaotic, just honest. You've spent a long time reacting to life. Deadlines, expectations, responsibilities, worries. You kept going because you had to, and without noticing, urgency started making your decisions for you. That's why slowing down feels unfamiliar. Stillness removes distraction, and distraction has been your hiding place. Now you can't say you didn't know. You can't say this came out of nowhere. You are aware. And awareness always asks for a response. I'm not standing over you with disappointment. I'm standing before you with truth. Not to trap you, but to free you from pretending everything is fine. You've been strong for a long time. Strong enough to endure. Strong enough to carry what you never meant to carry alone. But strength without surrender becomes strain, and you've felt that weight quietly growing. You feared that letting go would cost you yourself. Yet holding on has been costing you peace. Your joy didn't fade because you failed. Your clarity didn't fade because you changed. They faded because you kept ignoring the gentle moments I nudged you to pause. Small nudges, quiet prompts, thoughts you felt, then pushed aside. Not rebellion, fatigue. And I see that. Fatigue does not disqualify you. It simply means it's time to stop carrying what was never yours. You don't need to fix everything right now. You only need to decide who you trust with what comes next. Because this awareness will either soften your heart or slowly harden it. And the choice is closer than you think. You may not realize it yet, but something has already shifted. Not outside of you, inside. Because once you become aware, you can't return to pretending nothing is being asked of you. And that's why this moment feels fragile. Not because you're weak, but because honesty makes you open again. You've lived with a quiet pressure for a long time. A sense that you were meant for more depth, more alignment, more truth. Yet you weren't sure how to step toward it without unraveling what you built to feel secure. So you learned how to manage the distance, close enough to feel comfort, far enough to stay in control. And I allowed that space because forced closeness is not love. But now you're beginning to see something clearly. The distance you managed has been shaping you more than you noticed. It influenced what you avoided. It softened what once convicted you. It taught you to settle where you were meant to grow. I'm not saying this to accuse you. I'm saying it because I want you free. Freedom doesn't start with big action. It starts with a truthful pause, standing honestly where you are instead of running forward or backing away. That's where you are now. Between who you've been and who you're being invited to become. You don't need to rush. You don't need to prove anything. Just notice what rises when you stop controlling the outcome. The fears you carry, the parts of you tired of holding everything together. I'm not moving away. I'm waiting right here. Because this moment isn't about speed. It's about direction. And direction is decided quietly. long before anyone else can see it. You're standing in a place most people pass through too quickly, not because it's unimportant, but because it asks them to slow down long enough to feel what's real. And feeling what's real means admitting this isn't only about circumstances anymore. It's about the heart. You've been telling yourself you're waiting on me, but look honestly for a moment. How often have I been waiting on you? Waiting for you to stop asking for more signs and start responding to what you already recognize. You don't lack understanding, you lack agreement. You know what brings you closer and what quietly pulls you away. You know which voices sharpen you and which ones numb you. You know when you're choosing trust and when you're choosing comfort. That awareness didn't appear on its own. It grew from patience. I have been gentle with you, not because this doesn't matter, but because I know pressure can make you retreat. Still, gentleness does not mean indifference. There is a reason this moment keeps returning, why you circle back to it when everything grows quiet. Something in you understands that staying undecided is slowly becoming a decision. And that realization unsettles you, because it means you can't keep saying you're just figuring things out. You are choosing, even now. Choosing where your attention rests, what you delay, what you protect, and what you avoid releasing. I'm not angry with you, but I am inviting you to notice the pattern. Once you see it, you must decide whether you'll keep repeating or finally interrupt. This remains between you and me, a quiet moment where the question is no longer what you should do, but who you trust enough to lead you. This is where clarity begins to press in, not as answers, but as honesty. You're starting to recognize this was never only about one habit, one decision, or one moment you keep revisiting. It's about what has been shaping you while you weren't paying attention. Because something always is what you repeat, what you tolerate, what you excuse because it feels small. For a long time you believed you could stay spiritually aware without fully surrendering. You held both, wanting depth while protecting comfort. But awareness without response becomes weight. That's why you feel tired in ways rest doesn't fix. Why motivation fades quickly. Why your heart feels divided even when your intentions are good. Division exhausts you, not because you're doing too much, but because you're holding two directions at once. You want growth without disruption, calling without cost, change without release. And I understand why. But nothing living grows while refusing to let go of what no longer fits. You've asked me for clarity while resisting the very step that would make things clear. Clarity doesn't come from knowing more. It comes from choosing alignment. So be honest for a moment. What are you protecting? Not what you struggle with, what you guard. Not what you fear losing someday. What you are holding right now because it feels safer than trusting me with it. The invitation before you won't stay open in the same way forever. Not because I leave, but because repeated delay slowly quiets the heart's response. I don't want that for you. I want you awake, responsive, free. And freedom begins the moment you answer honestly what you already know I'm asking. This is the edge of the moment. Not the decision itself, but the place just before it, where everything becomes clear enough that you can't pretend confusion anymore. You feel it now. The weight hasn't lifted, but it's no longer uncertain. You understand this was never about pressure or performance. It has always been about direction, about who you allow to shape what comes next in you. You've circled these thoughts many times, replayed the same tensions, asked for peace while quietly postponing trust. And somewhere inside, you know you can't keep living divided without losing something important. Not all at once. Slowly. You don't want a faith that only comforts you. You want a faith that changes you. But change begins where you release your grip on control, on certainty, on the need to stay safe before you move. I am not asking you to leap blindly. I am asking you to loosen what you're holding. Trust isn't proven by how strongly you believe. It's revealed by how willing you are to follow when belief costs something. You've felt my patience through all of this. My nearness hasn't changed. What's changing now is your awareness of what's being asked. And awareness always leads to respond. You don't have to run, but you can't return to not knowing. So sit here for a moment longer and notice this. You already recognize what the next step is. This is the moment of knowing, not guessing, not wondering, knowing. You've reached the place where explanations grow quiet and truth becomes simple. The noise has faded just enough for you to recognize what has been present all along. You're not confused anymore. You're hesitant. Confusion asks for more information. Hesitation asks for trust. The next step isn't hidden from you. It isn't waiting somewhere in the future to be revealed. It has been close. Close enough that you've sensed it, then quickly shifted your attention elsewhere. You hoped I would remove the weight before you moved, but the weight isn't punishment, it's significance. If this were small, it wouldn't stay on your mind. If it were optional, it wouldn't return so often. If it didn't matter, you wouldn't still be here. You've wondered why this feels so personal, why it seems to narrow towards you instead of remaining general. Because I don't call you in broad statements. I call you specifically. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm not asking for strength. I'm asking for willingness. Willingness to stop delaying what you already recognize. Willingness to release what you hold for safety. Willingness to trust me with the part of your life you've kept guarded. You don't need to explain this to anyone else. You don't need to change everything today. But from this point forward, doing nothing will no longer feel neutral. It will feel heavy, because you now see clearly. So stay here a moment longer. Let the clarity settle. Because this is the place where obedience becomes possible. Not because you feel ready, but because you finally understand. This is the stillness before movement. Not empty, present. You can feel it now. Nothing more needs to be explained, and nothing new needs to be revealed. The question has already reached where words cannot go. You're no longer asking whether this matters. You're asking whether you're willing to respond. That quiet pressure in your chest isn't meant to overwhelm you. It's clarifying you. It removes the illusion that you can stay unchanged and still move forward. You've learned endurance through long seasons. You've learned patience through waiting. You've learned how to keep going even when you didn't understand what was happening. But survival isn't alignment, and alignment is what's being offered. Not forced, not demanded, offered. You don't have to become someone else to accept it. You only need to stop hiding parts of yourself from me. The doubt, the hesitation, the weariness you've covered with explanations. Bring that honestly. I'm not waiting for a polished version of you. I'm waiting for the real one, the one that admits where it's tired of pretending. Because honesty is where obedience begins. You may not feel ready. You may not feel certain. But readiness isn't the requirement right now. Direction is. This awareness will soften your heart, or slowly harden it depending on how you respond. So stay here just a little longer. Let the silence do its work. Something is forming beneath the surface. And what forms here will shape how you move from this moment forward. This is the moment where resistance grows quiet. Not because the fear has disappeared, but because truth is no longer easy to ignore. You can sense something settling inside you. Not dramatic, not emotional, just steady. You're beginning to realize obedience was never about proving anything to me. It was about trusting me enough to stop protecting yourself from me. You kept distance to feel safe. Yet that distance has cost you more than surrender ever would. You measured every step, guarded every reaction, calculated every outcome. And it helped you survive what you went through. But survival was never meant to be your destination. I didn't form you only to endure life. I formed you to walk with me honestly. Without hiding. You feared that saying yes fully would take control from you. But control isn't strength. Trust is. Trust doesn't remove fear. It changes which voice leads you when fear speaks. And right now, something in you is loosening its grip. You may not even know exactly what it is yet, only that you're not resisting the way you used to. That isn't weakness. That's surrender beginning. It doesn't arrive loudly. It begins quietly. A small internal agreement you barely notice, that you don't want to carry everything alone anymore, and that agreement mattered. Because once you stop pulling away, I can guide you without constant friction. Not rushing you, not overwhelming you, just leading step by step. You don't need the whole path. You only need to stop turning back. This is where trust stops being an idea and becomes a direction. And direction, once chosen, begins to change things long before anything around you looks different. This is where surrender becomes intentional, not emotional, not impulsive, chosen. You're no longer reacting to what you feel in the moment. You're deciding how you will respond, even while uncertainty still exists, and the change feels quieter than you expected. No sudden rush, no dramatic relief, just a steady resolve beginning to form. You're realizing that saying yes to me doesn't mean you suddenly understand everything. It means you stop holding back what you already know I've been asking for. You waited for fear to disappear first. But fear doesn't leave before obedience. It loses its authority after it. Peace doesn't come from avoiding the step. It comes from taking it. Right now, courage doesn't look like confidence. It looks like honesty. Admitting what you can't carry anymore. Admitting what pretending has cost you. Admitting you need me to lead instead of simply advise. That honesty is sacred. Because I can guide willingness. I can strengthen a heart that stops negotiating. You're not committing to perfection. You're committing to direction. And direction reshapes desire over time. What once felt impossible will start to feel necessary. What once felt heavy will become lighter. What once felt unclear will make sense gradually. Not because everything changes at once, but because you've stopped resisting change itself. This is the quiet courage of surrender. No witnesses, no applause, just a heart turning toward me. And that single, intentional turn is enough to begin what comes next. This is the moment after surrender is chosen. Nothing around you looks different yet. The same responsibilities wait. The same routines continue. The same conversations still exist. But something inside you has shifted. Direction has changed. And when direction changes internally, alignment begins externally. Slowly, faithfully, often without you noticing at first. You may sense it already. The pressure that once felt like resistance now feels like guidance, not excitement, not relief, clarity. You're no longer asking, should I? You're quietly accepting, I will. That decision didn't come from confidence. It came from understanding that staying where you were would cost more than moving forward. Obedience isn't loss. It restores order. Trust isn't passive. It moves you. You don't suddenly become fearless. Fear still whispers, but it no longer decides. You don't suddenly become strong. You simply stop pretending strength comes from holding everything together alone. And I see that change. Heaven responds to direction more than emotion. What you've done in this quiet moment, unseen by anyone else, has already begun to realign things you cannot yet see. You don't need to rush now. You don't need to prove anything. Remain in this posture of trust, because the path ahead does not open to force. It opens to surrender. This is where movement begins, quietly. Not with noise or announcement, but with steadiness taking root inside you. You expected surrender to feel dramatic, like something would instantly change around you. Yet what I begin most often feels simple, grounded, because what lasts must grow deeper than emotion. You're starting to notice a difference. Not everything feels resolved, but you are no longer divided. Your thoughts don't pull in opposite directions the way they used to. The tension that once followed you through the day has softened into something clear. Alignment doesn't always feel exciting. It feels settled. Your heart and your steps are finally pointing the same way. You don't need to rush now. You don't need to fix everything at once. Obedience isn't speed, it's consistency. One faithful response at a time. You may find old distractions losing their pull. Things that once filled your attention no longer hold you as strongly. Not because you forced yourself away from them, but because they no longer fit who you are becoming. Direction weakens confusion. Trust weakens fear. Surrender restores sensitivity. You're beginning to recognize my guidance again. Not louder, just steadier. Correction won't come with condemnation. Provision won't arrive before you walk, but it will meet you on the path. You don't need to look far ahead. Stay attentive right here. The greatest changes often begin without spectacle. A heart that has decided to walk forward instead of standing still. This is where trust begins to feel lived in. Not something you think about, something you practice. You're noticing your reactions changing. Not because you're forcing yourself to behave differently, but because your center has shifted. What once stirred anxiety now invites a quiet prayer. What once demanded control now asks for patience. That isn't coincidence, it's alignment taking hold. Walking with me is less about intensity and more about attentiveness. Small choices made consistently instead of dramatic moments remembered occasionally. You don't need to examine every step the way you used to. When trust leads, discernment follows. You begin to recognize what draws you closer and what quietly pulls you away. And instead of negotiating with that awareness, you respond. Not perfectly, but honestly. Honesty keeps the path clear. There will still be moments when old patterns try to return. Familiar fears will whisper, suggesting you handle things the way you once did. Yet now those voices don't carry the same authority. Trust has taken root, and roots don't shout, they hold. You don't have to brace yourself for failure anymore. You don't need to live tense, expecting everything to fall apart if you loosen your grip. Walking forward doesn't require strength, it requires presence. And presence is where I meet you, not ahead of you, not behind you, but with you. Step by step, the path unfolds, not suddenly, but faithfully. And as long as you remain responsive, you will not walk it alone. This is where the new direction begins to feel natural. Not because everything is easy, but because it's true. You're no longer pushing yourself forward while your heart lags behind. Something inside you is aligned, and obedience no longer feels like pressure. It feels like relief. Relief from constantly managing outcomes. Relief from bracing for disappointment. Relief from carrying what was never yours alone. You still face choices. You still meet uncertainty. But the question has changed. Instead of asking what you need to protect, you're asking what keeps you aligned. That difference quiets many struggles before they begin. You recognize sooner when something pulls you off course. Not because it's dramatic, but because it unsettles the peace you've started to go. And instead of ignoring that signal, you respond to it. You're learning to trust that I will correct you when needed and redirect you if you drift. You don't have to constantly monitor yourself with fear. Trust becomes active reliance, and reliance brings rest, not inactivity, but a steadiness that allows you to keep moving without exhaustion. You may not see every result yet. You may not feel transformed every day. But you are no longer standing at the threshold. You're walking. And as long as you stay attentive and honest, the path will keep opening before you. One faithful step at a time. This is where confidence begins to grow. Quietly. Not confidence in yourself, but confidence in the direction you're walking. You're no longer questioning every step, wondering if you're about to undo everything. Instead, you're starting to recognize the steady peace that follows alignment. Not the absence of difficulty, but the absence of inner conflict. When something unsettles you now, you notice it sooner. When something steadies you, you protect it. That awareness didn't appear suddenly. It formed each time you chose to listen instead of ignore, adjust instead of defend, remain present instead of rushing ahead. Walking with me doesn't remove responsibility. It reorders it. You are not responsible for outcomes. You are responsible for obedience, and that distinction frees you from carrying what was never yours to control. Old habits may still whisper, familiar fears may still return, but they no longer feel convincing, only familiar. You've begun to outgrow some things, not because you rejected them, but because you recognized something truer. Growth rarely announces itself. It settles, and as this quiet confidence forms, remember, trust in me doesn't make you rigid. It makes you responsive. It doesn't harden you. It grounds you. So keep walking at this pace, not hurried, not hesitant, steady. Because the path shaping you now is no longer driven by pressure, but by trust. This is where trust becomes your rhythm. Not something you check occasionally, something you move within. You're no longer measuring every decision by fear of failure. You're measuring it by faithfulness. And that changes the way you live each day. Your thoughts feel clearer when you stop rehearsing what might go wrong. Your heart feels steadier when you remember you're not leading alone. You're learning to listen before reacting, to pause before speaking, to move when something quietly feels right. Guidance rarely arrives as noise. Often it comes as a gentle narrowing, a calm sense of this way. And you're beginning to respect that. You pause when something disturbs your peace. You move when something invites trust. You release what creates inner friction. This isn't passivity, it's partnership. You walk. I guide. You respond. I provide. You remain attentive. I remain present. In this rhythm, growth no longer feels forced. Courage no longer feels like strain. It feels like agreement with the direction you're being led and the person you're becoming. You may still face uncertainty, but it no longer controls your pace. You're not behind. You're exactly where responsiveness has brought you. So continue this way. Not faster, not louder, just faithful. Because when trust becomes your rhythm, the path doesn't only open, it sustains you as you walk it. This is where faith feels steady, not intense, not fragile. Steady. You're no longer depending on strong emotions to know you're moving forward. You're learning that faithfulness often looks quiet, and quiet does not mean inactive. It means rooted. You don't question every step the way you once did. Not because questions disappeared, but because they no longer control you. You ask with patience now. You listen longer. You respond more gently. And gentleness is strength. Obedience is shaping your character before it changes your circumstances. Patience where there was urgency. Discernment where there was confusion. Peace where there was constant evaluation. This is formation. Roots grow before fruit appears. Some days won't feel remarkable. Some days won't feel certain. Yet consistency is building something deeper than certainty ever could. Faithfulness. Every quiet yes matters. Every small adjustment matters. Every unseen response matters. None of it is wasted. You're becoming anchored instead of reactive. And an anchored heart doesn't collapse when pressure comes, what it holds. So remain here, not striving to prove anything, not searching for constant reassurance, just walking, step by step. Because steady faith is the kind that carries you through whatever comes next. This is where your perspective begins to widen. You're no longer focused only on the step in front of you. You're starting to notice how far you've already come. Not with pride, with gratitude. You remember how heavy everything once felt, how every decision seemed urgent, how faith felt like something you had to manage instead of live. And now, even though life isn't effortless, it feels honest. You measure progress differently, not by speed, not by recognition, by peace, by how quickly you return to alignment when something pulls you away, by how naturally you pause before reacting, by how your heart settles instead of racing. That is wisdom forming. You're learning that setbacks don't erase direction, pauses don't cancel growth. Correction isn't rejection, it's care. Because of that, you're less afraid of mistakes. You adjust, listen, continue. You're not walking perfectly, you're walking honestly, and honesty keeps the way clear. You're beginning to sense that what lies ahead will require this steadiness, this patience you're learning now. Nothing about this season has been wasted. Every resistance, every surrender, every quiet choice shaped you. So remember this as you continue. You are no longer who you were, and you are becoming exactly who this journey requires. This is where patience begins to feel purposeful. Not waiting without direction, waiting with trust. You're no longer restless about what hasn't happened yet. Something in you has settled enough to understand that growth is occurring even when it isn't visible. You can sense it now. This season isn't empty. You're being taught how to remain steady without constant confirmation. How to keep choosing alignment even when results aren't immediate. How to value faithfulness more than urgency. And that kind of patience reshapes you. It softens reactions that once rushed. It sharpens awareness that once drifted. It teaches you how to move without forcing and wait without losing direction. You're recognizing that not every delay is denial. Some pauses protect you from moving before you're ready, from carrying what would overwhelm you, from reaching outcomes your foundation couldn't sustain yet. You don't resist the waiting the way you once did. You listen within it. You notice what rises when nothing distracts you, where trust deepens and where impatience still tries to lead. And instead of fighting that, you respond to it. Because patience isn't passive, It's trust, stretched over time. What is being formed in you now will support what is placed in your hands later. So don't rush this moment. The quiet work beneath the surface matters more than you can see, shaping how you will carry what comes next. With steadiness, humility, and a heart that knows how to remain aligned, even when the path takes longer than expected. This is where hope begins to settle in. Not as wishful thinking, as assurance. You're no longer hoping something will finally change. You're trusting someone is already at work, even when you can't measure it yet. And that changes how you wait. You don't rush outcomes the way you once did. You don't feel pressured to prove progress. You're learning that faith doesn't need constant evidence to remain steady. It rests in what it knows, not only in what it sees. You've started to rest without disconnecting, to stay attentive without straining. That balance didn't come easily. It formed through every quiet surrender, every patient step, every moment you chose alignment without recognition. Now hope feels anchored, not fragile, not dependent on quick results. You're beginning to understand timing differently, not as delay, but as care. Arriving too soon can harm what hasn't been strengthened yet, just as arriving too late can miss the moment. So you trust the pace. Nothing entrusted to me is wasted. Nothing surrendered is forgotten. What has been placed in my hands remains secure, even when you cannot trace it yet. Remain here, steady, attentive, unhurried. Because hope has taken root where urgency once lived, and it will carry you forward with a quiet confidence you didn't know you could have. This is where trust and hope begin to walk together, not as ideas, as posture. You're no longer bracing yourself for disappointment. You're no longer searching every moment for signs that something is wrong. Instead, you remain open without becoming anxious, and that is strength. You've begun to understand that hope is not wishing for a different future. It's cooperating with the one being formed. You notice when something aligns and you lean toward it. When something unsettles your peace, you release it without struggle. That ease didn't come from comfort. It came from clarity. You're no longer driven by urgency to arrive. You're guided by faithfulness to remain responsive, and responsiveness keeps you close enough to hear quiet direction before confusion grows. Walking with me doesn't require constant alertness for danger. It asks for awareness of direction. Direction has become familiar now. Not rigid, not forced, simply clear. You don't need to anticipate every challenge ahead. Grace will meet you where obedience leads you, just as it has each step so far. So remain in this posture, open, steady, willing, because when trust and hope move together, the path doesn't need to be fully visible. It only needs to be followed. This is where faith becomes part of your life, not separate from it. You're no longer switching between moments you call spiritual and moments you call ordinary. Trust now appears in small choices, in how you answer, how you pause, how you respond when no one is watching. And that changes everything. Faith isn't something you visit anymore. It's something you live within. You notice yourself listening before reacting. You choose honesty over convenience even when it costs you comfort. You keep small promises you once ignored because they seemed insignificant. Those quiet decisions are shaping you. You're not trying to appear strong. You're learning to remain faithful. And faithfulness gives meaning to responsibility. You show up because it matters, not because it's visible. You stay present because it forms you, not because it impresses anyone. Even ordinary days are no longer empty. They accumulate, reinforcing direction, deepening trust, preparing you for what requires steadiness. You don't fear being unnoticed the way you once did. You understand now that what matters most often grows quietly. So continue this way, letting trust guide how you live, decide, and respond. Because when faith becomes integrated into your life, it carries you forward consistently and makes you whole. This is where wholeness begins to feel real. Not perfect, not finished. Real. You're no longer pulled in opposite directions by competing fears and desires. What you believe and how you live are starting to agree, and that agreement brings a quiet peace. Not the absence of challenges, the absence of inner conflict. You don't spend as much energy debating every decision. You don't replay every mistake trying to protect yourself from the past. You're learning how to remain present instead of constantly correcting yourself. Presence changes everything. It lets you respond instead of react. Listen instead of assume. Move forward without dragging yesterday behind you. Growth no longer feels like constant evaluation. It feels like consistency, showing up aligned, staying honest, letting truth shape your pace. You're also less afraid of being unfinished. You understand wholeness isn't the absence of weakness. It's the absence of hiding. You bring your real self forward, not guarded, not carefully edited, just honest. And in that honesty, you discover something steady. You don't have to rush who you're becoming. You're already moving in the right direction. This is where your life begins to feel unified, not divided between what you believe and how you live, but aligned. You're no longer carrying one set of thoughts inside and another set of actions outside. What you choose and what you value are beginning to agree, and that agreement gives you strength. Not loud strength, settled strength. You don't spend as much time explaining yourself to yourself. Decisions come from a clearer place now, not from urgency or pressure. You're learning to move from alignment instead of reaction. And alignment makes you resilient. When pressure comes, you're not scrambling to remember what matters. You already know. Your pace isn't driven by fear of falling behind, and slowing down no longer feels like losing ground. You understand something important now. Direction matters more than speed. You don't need constant motion to prove progress. Steadiness itself reveals movement. The way you respond, the way you remain calm, the way you hold your peace. These are signs of change. This is maturity forming quietly, not dramatic. Not visible to everyone, but deeply rooted. And from this place of unity, whatever comes next will meet you not scattered, but ready. This is where the journey settles into purpose. Not because everything is finished, but because everything is aligned. You're no longer asking, am I doing enough? You're asking, am I staying true? And that question keeps you grounded. You've learned that faith isn't proven by intensity, but by endurance. Not by how loudly you believe, but by how faithfully you walk. You don't rush the future anymore. You stay present, aware that each step carries meaning when it's taken with trust. You understand now, I was never trying to hurry you. I was forming you. Every pause shaped patience. Every surrender built strength. Every quiet yes anchored your direction. And here you are, not at an ending, but at a readiness. Ready to carry what comes without losing yourself. Ready to move without fear, setting your pace. Ready to remain aligned even when the path stretches further than expected. Nothing in this journey was wasted. Not the waiting, not the struggle, not the moments you thought were delays. All of it led you here, steady, awake, grounded. So continue from this place remembering. You are not walking toward purpose. You are walking in it. This is where the path becomes yours. Not something you watch from a distance, not something you wonder about anymore, something you live. You may still face uncertainty. You may still encounter moments that test what you've learned, but you no longer measure your direction by comfort. You measure it by faithfulness, and that changes how you move forward. You don't wait for perfect clarity before acting. You respond to the light you have now. Each step confirms the next, not because everything is explained, but because trust has replaced hesitation. You understand something deeper now. Walking with me was never meant to remove every question. It was meant to anchor you while questions exist. You don't need every answer to keep going. You need willingness, and you've chosen that. So when doubt whispers, you won't panic. When delay happens, you won't assume absence. When change comes, you won't retreat, because you know who leads you. The journey ahead will continue shaping you, but you no longer walk trying to become someone worthy. You walk knowing you're already invited, and that invitation remains with you in every step. Carry that awareness forward, not as pressure, as peace. And remember this quietly. You were never meant to walk perfectly, only faithfully. This is where peace becomes familiar. Not because life stops changing, but because you stop resisting what is guiding you through. The noise around you may still rise and fall, yet inside something remains steady. You're no longer searching for constant reassurance. You've learned to recognize my presence in small confirmations, the quiet sense of rightness, the gentle restraint when something isn't meant for you, the calm that returns after you choose truth over ease. Peace doesn't come from controlling outcomes. It comes from trusting who holds them. You've begun to notice how different your days feel now. Not easier, but clearer. Decisions carry less pressure because you no longer believe everything depends on you alone. You prepare, you act, you remain attentive, but you release what you cannot hold. And in releasing it, you gain rest. Rest doesn't mean inactivity. It means your heart no longer runs ahead of your steps. You can face uncertainty without needing immediate answers, and you can wait without assuming something has gone wrong. That steadiness becomes a quiet testimony within you, not spoken loudly, but lived consistently. So continue walking this way, not striving for perfection, not fearing interruption, simply remaining present. Because peace grows where trust stays, and as long as you remain with me in this posture, you will carry that peace into whatever meets you next. This is where understanding deepens. You begin to see that guidance was never only about where you were going. It was about who you were becoming while you walked. Each moment you chose trust over control changed something within you, even when nothing around you shifted immediately. You once looked for clear signs before moving. Now you move with quiet confidence, and the signs follow. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just enough to keep you attentive. You notice how often clarity arrives after obedience, not before it. How peace confirms a step you were hesitant to take. How restraint protects you from paths that once seemed harmless. You're learning that my voice rarely competes with noise. It waits for willingness. And you've grown willing, not perfectly, but sincerely. Because of that, confusion no longer dominates your thoughts. Questions still come, but they don't unsettle you the way they once did. You've learned to hold them without losing direction. This is discernment forming, not guessing, recognizing. You recognize when to pause and when to continue, when to speak and when to stay quiet, when to hold on and when to release. And as this awareness becomes natural, you understand something you once overlooked. I wasn't only guiding your steps, I was shaping your heart to recognize the path. This is where gratitude begins to replace striving. You notice it quietly. The urge to prove yourself has softened. You're no longer trying to earn what was already given. Instead of asking if you've done enough, you find yourself thankful for what has been carried with you all along. You remember how heavy everything once felt when you believed every outcome depended on you. Now you work, decide, and move forward, but without the same pressure pressing on your thoughts. Gratitude changes how you see your days. Ordinary moments no longer feel small. A calm conversation, a restrained reaction, a patient response. These become reminders that growth has taken root in places you once overlooked. You're not chasing approval anymore. You're recognizing presence, and presence steadies you. It keeps you from comparing your pace with others, from measuring your life only by visible progress. You understand now that unseen changes often matter most. So you continue with a lighter heart, not careless, attentive, not passive, willing, because when gratitude grows, fear loses its grip, and what once felt like effort begins to feel like peace, lived out one day at a time. This is where confidence turns outward, not in pride, in quiet assurance. You're beginning to notice how your steadiness affects others. You don't try to correct them or convince them. You simply remain calm where you once reacted, patient where you once rushed, gentle where you once defended yourself. And without announcing it, something changes in the atmosphere around you. People sense the difference before they understand. They trust your words more because they feel your peace first. Not because you have perfect answers, but because you no longer need to prove them. You've learned that influence doesn't come from intensity. It comes from consistency. So you listen more carefully. You speak more thoughtfully. You carry yourself with a quiet confidence that doesn't demand attention. It invites it. You may not notice how often someone feels encouraged after being near you, or how your steadiness steadies them, but this is part of the purpose forming through you. Not to stand above others, but to walk in a way that makes hope believable again. You are not performing faith anymore. You are living it. And as you live it, what has been shaped within you begins to reach beyond you, gently, naturally, without effort. Because a life aligned does more than guide itself. It lights the path for others. This is where responsibility becomes gentle, not a burden placed on you, a trust shared with you. You begin to understand that what you carry now is not pressure to perform, but care to remain attentive. You don't have to force outcomes or manage everyone around you. You only remain faithful to what has been placed in your hands today. And a day is enough. You once worried about whether you would be able to sustain this change, whether you might slip back into old ways. But you're learning that faithfulness isn't maintained by effort alone. It's sustained by staying close. Close in awareness, close in honesty, close in response. When you drift, you notice sooner. When you hesitate, you return quicker. Not because you're perfect, but because your direction is settled. Responsibility now feels lighter because you're not carrying it alone. You act, you choose, you continue, and you release the rest. You understand that growth is not fragile when it's rooted in trust. It doesn't depend on constant strength from you. It depends on constant connection. So you move forward without fear of losing what has been formed, not guarding it anxiously, but living it naturally. Because what has truly taken root in you will not disappear. It will continue to grow as long as you remain willing. This is where freedom feels real. Not because every limitation has disappeared, but because the weight you once carried alone no longer defines you. You move through your days without the constant tension of holding everything together. You still plan. You still care. You still act. But you no longer grip every outcome as if it depends entirely on you. Freedom doesn't remove responsibility. It removes fear from it. You're able to face uncertainty without imagining the worst. You allow space for what you cannot predict, and in that space you find a calm you once thought required perfect circumstances. It never did. You begin to notice how much energy was spent protecting yourself from what might happen. Now that energy becomes presence, attention to what is actually in front of you. You listen more fully. You respond more patiently. You rest more deeply. And rest no longer feels like escape. It feels like trust. You understand now. Freedom is not distance from life, but closeness to it without fear controlling your pace. So continue walking this way, open, steady, unguarded. Because a heart no longer ruled by fear can finally live fully. And living fully is where peace remains. This is where courage becomes quiet. Not the kind that announces itself, the kind that remains steady. You notice it in simple moments, when you choose honesty instead of comfort. When you keep your word even if no one would know otherwise. When you move forward without needing every reassurance first. You're no longer waiting to feel fearless before acting. You act because you trust who walks with you. Courage has changed its meaning. It isn't force. It isn't urgency. It's willingness. Willingness to stay present when uncertainty appears. Willingness to continue when progress seems slow. Willingness to remain kind when reaction would be easier. You once thought courage would feel intense. Instead, it feels calm. A settled decision repeated again and again. And with each repetition, hesitation loses its voice. You understand now that courage doesn't remove difficulty. It steadies you within it. It keeps you aligned when emotions fluctuate, when opinions shift, when circumstances press. So you don't rush ahead and you don't retreat. You remain. Because real courage is not found in dramatic moments. It's found in faithful ones, repeated over time. This is where endurance takes shape, not forcing yourself forward, continuing because your direction is settled. You notice that challenges no longer feel like interruptions to your path. They feel like part of it. You don't interpret difficulty as failure the way you once did. Instead, you stay steady inside it. Endurance is not loud. It is the quiet decision to remain when leaving would be easier. The calm choice to continue when nothing applauds you. The simple faithfulness of showing up again tomorrow. You've learned that strength isn't measured by how quickly you move, but by how consistently you stay aligned. You don't rush progress anymore, and you don't abandon it when it slows. Because your confidence is no longer in outcomes. It is in the one guiding you. So when weariness comes, You rest without giving up. When uncertainty appears, you pause without turning back. When questions arise, you hold them without losing direction. This is endurance, steady trust, stretched across time. And over time, that steadiness forms something lasting within you. A resilience that doesn't depend on perfect conditions, only on continued willingness. So continue. Not hurried, not hesitant, just faithful. And faithfulness will carry you farther than urgency ever could. This is where strength feels gentle, not something you push outward, something that holds you steady from within. You realize now that real strength doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need to prove itself in every moment. It simply remains when pressure rises. You've changed in ways you might not have noticed at first. Situations that once unsettled you now meet a calmer response. Words that once lingered in your thoughts no longer control your peace. That isn't indifference. It's stability. You no longer react to everything that pulls at you. You choose what deserves your attention and release what doesn't. And in doing so, you protect your direction without hardening your heart. Gentle strength allows you to stay kind without becoming weak, patient without becoming passive, and firm without becoming harsh. You understand now that strength is not resisting every challenge. It is remaining aligned through them. So when pressure comes, you don't brace yourself the way you once did. You remain present. You respond with clarity. You let peace guide your pace. Because strength that is rooted in trust doesn't need to struggle to survive. It quietly endures and keeps you grounded. This is where your perspective turns outward again, but differently than before. You're no longer looking around to compare your path with someone else's. Instead, you begin to notice opportunities to give what you've received. Patience, calm, understanding. You don't force it. You don't plan it. It simply appears in how you live. A conversation where you choose listening instead of correcting. A moment where you offer reassurance instead of judgment. A situation where you slow down so another person can breathe. These small choices matter more than you think. You once believed purpose would arrive as a single, clear assignment. Now you recognize it often unfolds through everyday faithfulness. The way you carry yourself, the way you respond, the way you remain steady when others feel uncertain. You're not trying to become someone important. You're becoming someone reliable, and reliability builds trust. Not only in you, but in the peace you carry. People may not know why they feel calmer around you, but they sense it. This is influence without effort. You don't need to speak loudly about what guides you. Living it consistently says enough. Your life begins to reflect a quiet invitation that steadiness is possible, that hope can be real, that change can last. So continue in this simplicity, because when faith becomes lived rather than explained, it reaches further than words ever could. This is where your pace becomes settled. You're no longer rushing to prove progress, and you're no longer afraid of slowing down. You've learned that movement guided by trust doesn't need to be hurried to be meaningful. Some days feel ordinary, and that no longer worries you. You understand now that consistency shapes more than intensity ever could. Showing up, remaining attentive, choosing honesty again and again. These quiet repetitions build something lasting. You're not chasing dramatic moments anymore. You're protecting steady ones. Because steadiness keeps your heart clear. It helps you notice small changes before they become large problems. It allows you to respond early instead of repairing later. And in this settled pace, you begin to feel less divided. You don't carry the tension of needing to be everywhere at once, or everything at once. You simply remain where you are with full attention. That attention brings peace. You move forward without forcing outcomes, trusting that what needs to unfold will do so at the right time. You prepare, you act, you release, and you rest in between. This rhythm is sustainable, so keep walking this way. Not accelerated, not delayed. Just steady. Because a settled pace doesn't slow your life, it strengthens it. This is where clarity becomes quiet confidence. You no longer feel the need to question every decision after you make it. You move, and then you remain at peace with the step you chose. Not because you're certain about every outcome, but because you're certain about the direction. Doubt still visits sometimes, but it doesn't stay. You recognize it, you listen for what is true, and you continue. You've learned that confidence isn't the absence of questions, it's the presence of trust while questions exist. You're also less pulled by urgency around you. When others rush, you pause. When pressure rises, you steady your thoughts before responding. That pause protects you. It keeps you from reacting out of fear. It keeps you aligned with what matters. And the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. What once required effort now feels instinctive, not forced discipline, but formed character. You're not holding everything together anymore. You're participating, attentive but not overwhelmed. Because clarity doesn't mean controlling the future, it means walking faithfully in the present. So continue in this quiet confidence, not loud, not defensive, just steady. And steadiness will guide you through whatever appears next. This is where your heart feels anchored. Not because life has stopped shifting, but because you have stopped drifting with it. Situations still change, plans still adjust, unexpected moments still arrive. Yet inside something holds steady. You return to center faster than before. You don't stay unsettled as long. That anchoring didn't come from avoiding difficulty. It came from learning where to stand when difficulty comes. You've discovered that stability isn't found in controlling circumstances. It's found in trusting the one who remains constant through them. And because of that, you no longer panic when things move differently than you expected. You pause, you listen, you continue. The need to have everything figured out has softened. You act responsibly, but you release what you cannot manage. And releasing it doesn't feel careless anymore. It feels wise. You understand now that peace isn't something you chase. It's something you stay aligned with. So when noise rises around you, you don't absorb all of it. When uncertainty presses, you don't assume the worst. You stay anchored. And an anchored heart can move forward without fear of every wave, because it knows what holds it steady beneath the surface. This is where awareness turns into wisdom. You're no longer only noticing what happens. You understand how to respond to it. Experience that once confused you now teach you. Moments that once overwhelmed you now guide you. You've learned to pause before reacting, to listen before concluding, to wait before deciding. And in that pause, clarity often appears. Wisdom isn't knowing everything ahead of time. It's recognizing what matters in the moment you're in. You don't chase every opportunity anymore. You choose carefully. You don't carry every burden anymore. You release what isn't yours. You don't argue with every voice anymore. You discern which ones deserve your attention. And that discernment protects your peace. You understand that not every open door must be entered, and not every closed one is a loss. Some are direction. Some are mercy. So you move thoughtfully now, not hesitant, not reckless, just aware. Because wisdom shapes your steps quietly, guiding you through choices you once would have faced alone, and turning ordinary moments into steady progress. This is where your heart learns to rest while still moving forward. You no longer feel the need to carry tomorrow before it arrives. You prepare for what you can, and you release what you cannot hold yet. That release doesn't feel careless. It feels trusting. You understand now that rest is not stopping. It's walking without tension. You still care deeply about what lies ahead, but you don't let the future pull you out of the present. You give your attention to what is in front of you, and that attention brings clarity. Anxiety once made every step feel urgent. Now patience gives every step meaning. You don't rush conversations. You don't force outcomes. You don't hold every possibility in your mind at once. Instead, you stay here, attentive and willing, because when your heart rests, your direction becomes clearer. Decisions come with less pressure. You act with care instead of fear. You're learning that trust is not passive. It is participation without strain. So you continue forward, engaged, awake, but unburdened. And in that posture you discover a steady truth. Peace doesn't come when everything is finished. It comes when you stop trying to finish everything alone. This is where confidence becomes quiet gratitude. You're no longer surprised by the steadiness within you. You're thankful for it. What once felt unfamiliar now feels natural. Not because life became simple, but because you've learned how to remain grounded within it. You notice how differently you respond to pressure. Where you once hurried, you pause. Where you once worried, you trust. Where you once held tightly, you release. And instead of asking, will this last? You recognize, this has been forming all along. Gratitude keeps you attentive. It reminds you that growth didn't happen overnight, and it won't disappear in a moment. Each small step you took mattered. Each quiet decision shaped the person you're becoming. You don't carry your progress with pride. You carry it with humility. You know how easily you once lost peace and how faithfully it has been restored. So you continue gently, aware that this steadiness is not something you created alone. It's something you learned to remain within. And because of that, you no longer fear the future the same way. You don't know every detail ahead, but you trust the direction you're being led. And that trust turns every step into a reason to be thankful, even before you see where the road ends. This is where quiet assurance settles deeply. You don't need constant reminders anymore to believe you're being guided. You sense it in the steadiness of your thoughts, in the calm that returns even after difficult moments, in the way you recover without losing direction. You've learned that certainty is not always loud. Often it feels like a quiet knowing that remains when emotions shift. You no longer chase confirmation the way you once did. You act with care, and then you rest in the choice you made. Not every step feels dramatic, yet each one feels honest. That honesty keeps you grounded. You notice how much lighter decisions feel when you stop imagining every possible outcome. You handle what's present and trust what isn't yet visible. And when something unexpected appears, you adjust instead of retreating. You understand now that trust is proven over time, not in a single moment, but in repeated faithfulness. So you continue forward without the urgency to validate every step. You live attentively, and the path becomes clear as you walk it. Because assurance grows where willingness stays, and willingness has become part of you now. Steady, quiet, and enduring. This is where your heart becomes steady in every season. Not only when things feel clear, but even when they don't. You've learned that stability isn't the absence of change. It's remaining grounded while change happens around you. When uncertainty appears now, you don't rush to escape it. You stay present long enough to understand. You respond instead of react. You've also noticed that your expectations have softened. You no longer demand that every moment feel meaningful. You allow ordinary days to be enough, and in doing so, you discover how much peace lives inside them. You work faithfully, you rest honestly, you continue patiently. And patience protects your perspective. It keeps small disappointments from becoming large discouragements. It keeps delays from turning into doubt. You understand something now. Steadiness is not built in perfect conditions. It is built by remaining aligned in imperfect ones. So you keep walking, not resisting change, not fearing it. You adapt without losing direction. You trust without needing constant reassurance. Because a steady heart doesn't depend on the season. It carries its peace through everyone. This is where the journey feels natural. Not effortless, but familiar. You're no longer thinking about every step you take. Alignment has become instinctive. The choices that once required long internal debates now come with quiet clarity. You don't wrestle the same way anymore. You recognize sooner. You respond quicker. You recover faster. Growth has settled into rhythm. You understand now that faithfulness was never meant to feel extraordinary every day. It was meant to become part of how you live. Steady, ordinary, consistent. And in that consistency, confidence grows without noise. You don't measure your progress constantly. You simply continue. The need to analyze every moment has faded because direction is no longer uncertain. You're attentive but not tense. Committed but not pressured. Present but not overwhelmed. This is maturity. When trust stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like home. So you keep moving forward, not trying to maintain what you've gained, but living within it. Because what has been formed in you now carries you naturally, step after step. This is where the journey becomes a testimony, not one you need to announce, one you live. You don't feel the need to explain every change in you. The steadiness, the patience, the clarity, they speak quietly through your choices. Others may not know the full story, but they notice the peace you carry. And that peace is not accidental. It grew through every moment you chose trust over control. Every time you stayed when leaving felt easier. Every decision to remain aligned when no one else would have known the difference. You see now that transformation rarely happens in one moment. It happens in many small ones lived faithfully. You are not who you were, not because you forced yourself to change, but because you stayed responsive long enough to be shaped. And this shaping continues. There will still be new steps, new seasons, new lessons, but you no longer fear them the same way. You know how to walk now, attentive, steady, willing, so you move forward carrying what has been formed within you. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but faithfully. And faithfulness is enough, because a life lived this way doesn't just reach an ending. It keeps becoming a witness to the quiet work that changed you along the way. Take a slow breath for a moment. You don't need to rush away from this. Right now, just pause where you are. Not to analyze everything you heard, not to force a feeling, but simply to be still. Because sometimes the most important step isn't what you do next. It's what you quietly allow to settle inside you. If something in your heart feels clearer than before, hold on to that. If something feels unsettled, don't ignore it. Let it guide your prayer instead of avoiding it. You don't need perfect words. Just speak honestly. God, I'm here. I don't want to keep running from what you're showing me. Give me the courage to trust you with what I've been holding on to. Stay there for a moment. You are not being asked to fix your whole life tonight, only to respond to what you now recognize. And if you needed this message today, there's a good chance someone else does too. Share it with them quietly, not to convince, but to invite. Whenever you're ready, continue your day with this awareness. You're not alone in the next step, and you don't have to carry it by yourself. Before you go, keep one simple habit from this moment. When life becomes loud again, and it will, return to stillness, even if only for a minute. Pause, breathe, listen, not for a dramatic sign, not for a perfect feeling, but for that steady direction you now recognize. The same awareness you felt here can meet you in ordinary places, in a quiet morning, in a difficult conversation, in a choice you almost make automatically. You don't have to recreate this moment. You only have to remember it. And when you forget, because sometimes you will, come back again, without guilt. Growth isn't kept by never drifting. It's kept by returning. So walk forward today attentive, not pressured, responsive, not afraid. Carry peace where you go, and let your next decision come from trust, rather than urgency. That is enough for today. And one last thing to hold with you. You don't have to understand every step ahead to keep moving faithfully in the one you're standing in. When questions come, let them slow you, not stop you. When uncertainty appears, let it invite prayer, not panic. When you feel strong, stay humble. When you feel weak, stay honest. Return often to quiet moments like this, not as an escape, but as a reminder of where your direction is found. What you experienced here was not meant to stay here. It was meant to follow you into your ordinary day, into your choices, your words, your reactions, your pace. So go gently, not trying to prove anything, not trying to control everything. Just remain willing, because a willing heart keeps hearing, keeps learning, and keeps walking, one faithful step at a time. As you leave this moment, carry simplicity with you. You don't need to hold on to every sentence, only the direction it pointed toward. When your thoughts become crowded later, return to what was clear. Respond honestly. Walk patiently. Trust steadily. There will be moments today that feel ordinary and small. Treat them carefully. Often the next right step hides inside the smallest choices. A restrained word, a kind response, a pause before reacting. Let those be your practice. And if you notice yourself drifting back into hurry or pressure, don't condemn yourself. Just slow down again. Realignment is always one honest decision away. You're not asked to do this perfectly, only sincerely. So go forward attentive to what brings peace and willing to release what doesn't. The path continues in front of you, and each quiet step keeps you aligned with it. That is enough for now. Before this truly ends, remember this gently. You don't have to hold on to this feeling to keep the change it began. Feelings rise and fall, but direction can remain. So when tomorrow feels ordinary again, or even heavy, don't assume you lost what was given here. Just return to the same posture, honest, willing, attentive. Growth rarely feels dramatic after the moment passes. It becomes daily, a choice to pause instead of rush, a decision to trust instead of control, a quiet prayer instead of silent worry. Let those small responses become your rhythm. And if you ever wonder whether you're still moving forward, don't measure by emotion. Measure by direction, by whether you keep turning your heart toward what is true. Stay with that. One step, then another, then another. That is how change lasts. So before you leave completely, hold this quietly. Nothing here asked you to become someone else overnight. It invited you to become honest, one step at a time. Tomorrow you may wake up and life will look ordinary again. The same responsibilities, the same people, the same routines. Don't mistake that for nothing changing. Real change rarely announces itself. It continues underneath. You'll notice it in small moments. A reaction you choose not to follow. A thought you release sooner. A pause where you once hurried. That is where this continues. If you remember everything, good. If you forget most of it, that's alright too. Just return to one simple direction. Respond to what you know is right when you recognize it. You are not being asked to carry today forever, only to live it faithfully while it is today. And as you go, don't try to hold on to the experience. Carry the awareness instead, because awareness stays long after emotion fades. So walk forward calm, not pressured to be perfect, not afraid of missteps, just attentive. This moment doesn't end here. It continues wherever you choose to remain willing. And if, later on, you find yourself wondering whether any of this mattered, remember this. Change is rarely measured in moments. It's measured in direction. You may not feel different every hour. You may not notice progress every day. But each time you choose honesty over avoidance, patience over reaction, trust over control, the path strengthens beneath you. So don't wait for a dramatic sign that something has begun. You've already begun, the moment you decided to listen. From here, simply keep responding when you recognize what is true. Return when you drift. Pause when you hurry. Release what pulls you away from peace. That is enough. And as you move forward, let this stay with you quietly. You don't have to chase the next step. You only have to walk the one you've been given. Now let the moment end gently. Not with pressure to remember every word, and not with the fear of losing what you felt, but with a quiet decision to carry its direction into the rest of your day. You don't need to search for another sign right now. You've already been given enough light for the step in front of you, so close this with peace. Whatever waits for you after this, conversations, responsibilities, thoughts that return, meet them slowly. You are allowed to respond instead of react. You are allowed to pause instead of rush. And if the noise grows again later, come back to stillness for a moment and listen the same way you did here. Because guidance does not disappear when this ends. It simply walks with you beyond it. Go forward calmly. You are not meant to carry everything at once, only to take the next faithful step. And as this finally closes, leave with one quiet assurance. You are not starting over tomorrow. You are continuing. Nothing true that settled in your heart here disappears just because the moment ends. It moves with you into ordinary hours, into small choices, patient responses, and honest pauses. So don't pressure yourself to recreate this feeling. Live from the direction it pointed you toward. When the day feels full, breathe and slow your pace. When you feel unsure, choose what keeps your heart clear. When you forget, simply return again. That return is part of the path, not failure. You don't have to carry certainty, only willingness. And willingness will keep opening the way in front of you, step after step, even when you cannot see far ahead. So go in quiet confidence. What began here doesn't stay here. It continues with you. So now let this rest. You don't need another explanation. You don't need a final sign. Just carry this simple awareness with you. You listen, and that already changed something. From here, life will keep moving. Sounds will return. Tasks will wait. Thoughts will compete for your attention. But beneath all of that, you can remain steady. Return to quiet when you can. Choose honesty when it's uncomfortable. Trust even when it's small. That is how the path continues. And whenever you wonder if you're still moving forward, remember, progress is not always felt, but it is formed each time you respond to what you know is right. Walk gently now. You are not alone in what comes next, and you never were. And with this, you can release the moment peacefully. You don't need to hold on to it tightly for it to matter. What is meant to remain will remain, not as a feeling you chase, but as a direction you quietly follow. When you step back into your routine, let it be simple. Do the next right thing you recognize. Speak a little softer. Pause a little longer. Trust a little sooner. Small steps are where lasting change lives. And if tonight or tomorrow feels ordinary again, don't question whether anything happened here. Growth often moves beneath the surface before it ever shows in the open. So continue calmly, without pressure to prove anything. Because what you carry now is not an ending. It's a beginning that walks with you. Before you close this completely, take one last quiet breath. Let everything settle, not to hold it, but to acknowledge it. You were given a moment to pause, to notice, to listen. That alone changes how the next hours unfold. You don't have to protect it anxiously. Just remember the direction it pointed you toward. When you move forward from here, keep it simple. Notice what brings peace. Follow it. Notice what disturbs it. Question it. Notice when you hurry. Slow down. You don't need to see far ahead to walk faithfully now. And if later you wonder whether you imagined this moment, you didn't. You recognize something real enough to stop and listen. And recognition always leaves a mark. So continue gently into your day or night. Nothing dramatic needs to happen next. Only one honest step after another. And now, allow this to close quietly. No pressure to hold every thought. No need to replay every word. Just carry the awareness that you paused. And in pausing, you chose to listen. From here, the path continues in ordinary moments. A decision made calmly. A reaction softened. A small choice guided by peace instead of hurry. If later you forget, return again. If later you doubt, slow down again. If later you feel distant, be honest again. The way forward isn't complicated. It's repeated willingness. So step back into your day with a steady heart. Nothing more is required right now. Only the next faithful moment. Before this ends, take a quiet breath with me. God, for the one listening right now, give them peace where their thoughts have been heavy, clarity where decisions feel uncertain, and courage for the step they already know is before them. Let them rest tonight without fear of tomorrow. Let them walk tomorrow without carrying yesterday. Remind them they are not forgotten, not overlooked, and not alone in what comes next. And as this moment closes, may your presence remain steady with them, in small choices, in ordinary hours, and in every place they go from here. Amen. Now go gently. You don't need to have everything figured out, only to keep walking faithfully from this point forward.